Alrighty, so today we are here with Team 5 to kind of go through what SMR deployment at remote mining locations can look like. Team 5 is comprised of Cole Moyler, who is not here, he's out on travel. Myself, a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I probably should say my name is Ryan at this point. We have Jane, who is not currently present. And Mackenzie, can you introduce yourself?
Undergraduate nuclear engineering student at Ontario Tech in Ontario.
Alrighty, so we've got a quick outline. We're going to break it into three main chunks. The first chunk is mining considerations. What does energy usage in remote mines look like? How could SMRs, be integrated into these operations? And then we'll look at several potential mining sites with a further in-depth analysis of the Ring of Fire, which is a Northern Ontario mine. The second chunk will look at the SMR deployment strategies with a focus on regulatory considerations and risk mitigation for SMRs. And then the final chunk is a just kind of brief summary of our thoughts on the matter and any key points we've noticed. So starting out, energy usage in the remote mining industry is kind of complex and can be very logistically intensive. These remote mining locations typically run on diesel generators if they're unable to get grid power. And these diesel shipments can be very expensive. They're going to be paying much higher rates rather than you would if you were putting diesel in a car, for instance. And they're going to be buying significant quantities at any given time, which can really rack up costs quickly. And electricity is, as with most modern things, very important to the day-to-day operations at a mine. But there is also a consideration for heating and cooling in these remote locations. In northern Canada, you're looking at, keeping your workers warm enough so that they don't freeze. And if you're looking at remote mining locations in sub-Saharan Africa, you have kind of the opposite issue where you need to make sure everyone can stay cool. And if you don't do that, your operational health of your mine may have, significant impediments to it.
The can brought up is why do SMRs fit in remote mining industries? So there's a lot of economic benefits. As you were talking about, the current energy supply can often be diesel, which can be very expensive and require, constant trips out there. The SMRs would also be able to provide a sustainable and reliable power source in the area, and it could help even increase the economy in the local area through diverse uses of SMRs. You can both use the electricity as well as the heat generation for various industries, as well as it could, obviously supply the mines with a stable source of energy that could be used for, near the life of the entire mine there. On top of that, it also produces, very low net greenhouse gas emissions, none directly. So during this case study, we looked at a bunch of potential mining sites. There's the Ring of Fire mentioned above. That's a Northern Ontario region that contains a lot of copper, zinc, and chromate mines. We also looked at the Alberta oil sands, where you could use the electricity as well as the cogeneration heat for the extraction and distillation of oil. We also looked at sub-Saharan Africa. So here the SMRs could supply not only the mine, but also the local area with stable electricity, as well as if off of peak demand, you could use excess energy for various processes such as desalination of water, where you could also use the cogeneration heat. So the Ring of Fire in Ontario, this is an area that's about 300 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay. The area is 2,100 square kilometers in area and has over 13,000 active mining claims of very mineral-rich land. So it's a very large area for potential mining. However, there has not been much mining done in the area for these minerals, copper, zinc, and chromate, due to the lack of infrastructure and the lack of an electrical grid up there. As well as since there are so many active mining claims in such a small area, there's large potential for mines to be able to share the electrical infrastructure. So on the east side there, you can see the potential energy use of a single mine called the Eagles Peak mine, which is looking at being developed, and it's looking around during the mining around that kind of microreactor to SMR range of 22 megawatts. So when looking further into this Ring of Fire area, we actually realized this is a missed opportunity. So there's a government plan currently in place in order to extend out the electrical grid to not only the region of the Ring of Fire, but also 24 communities in the area. This will build around 1,800 kilometers of transition towers and will end up costing them around $2 billion to do. So with this, one of our questions and kind of the main focus of what we wanted to bring up here is how can we make SMRs a competitive alternative, and how can we make it so the next time you have a case like this, SMRs could be the choice. So here are a few questions and considerations we think you really need to look into. So first is we need to develop a commercially available SMR. Currently, it's a risk to invest in first-of-a-kind technology, and if industry sees it, they could be worried about cost overruns or even delays to their project. So it kind of impedes and deters more investment in the area. Another very important area is to outreach to communities and companies involved. So this is to show them, the technology exists, what the benefits are, and that it's safe. Some of those benefits, as mentioned before, are you can use cogeneration heat to supply local needs and develop industry. This could be, desalination of water, fractional distillation, or anything that could use a low quality heat. Additionally, to make more economic viability out of these options, there's essentially the need to have off-power, off-peak energy usage. So this could be, local industry like metal refining, or you could even go into something like data farming or data mining, where you can use this to still get a good price on your energy. And then finally, it's also, you have to demonstrate reactor safety, as with nuclear, safety always has to be one of our main concerns.
Alrighty, so we're going to take a brief look at what infrastructure and kind of location characteristics a microreactor or an SMR could need. First off, the local infrastructure will need to be built up most likely. There will need to be some method of electricity distribution, coolant piping, storage facilities, and most importantly, roads, so the SMR can actually be delivered. Northern Ontario and other locations have, some degree of flood proneness, so a flood response and local emergency services will be necessary for accident response should an accident occur. There's going to need to be utilities for plant workers, attracting reactor staff before any, kind of homegrown training occurs on site is going to require high pay or local utilities and amenities to make sure that you can actually staff the reactor site. And emergency planning zones and procedures will be more complicated with this limited infrastructure. In the case of evacuations, it could get pretty difficult to evacuate if you only have one road going in and out of your, community. And then, as was mentioned earlier, infrastructure will be needed just to, deliver the reactor itself and any other supplies. There are some regulatory concerns as well. These SMRs would be placed in very, very remote locations, with the nearest named towns 40 miles away as the crow flies. There's not a lot of seismic activity in these areas, so it does make that part of the regulatory case easier. It's also far from the ocean. Forest fires could be problematic in these remote areas. A lot of the times it's not going to be easy to put out a forest fire in these regions just due to the lack of emergency services and infrastructure. And finally, again, flooding could be problematic as marshlands and rivers could flood, causing issues for infrastructure. And some of the risk mitigation measures that could be taken for SMRs are developing a framework that can be kind of, copy and pasted around to different sites would really make this easier. So steps to prevent systems failure and to return the plate to normal operations, in-depth knowledge of what your inherent safety features and fail-safe design buy you in an accident. Several steps are necessary to mitigate the consequences of any potential radioactive release. In the case of a mine, you'd want to make sure you don't contaminate the mine itself and obviously preserve worker health. And above all, transparent guidelines for the release of accident information. It does no one any good to hide any accident information. So as just kind of a quick summary, the remote mining industries in Canada should be compatible with SMRs, provided more development is done in SMRs. Going along with that development time, SMRs need to reach deployment as quickly as feasible. Don't cut corners or anything, but these missed opportunities, like the Ring of Fire, are expensive, for lack of a better term. And that regulatory concerns and public outreach, both to employees at a mine and to local communities that are unrelated to the mine, remain critical for SMRs to be deployed. And with that, that's our presentation.
Okay, great, guys. Sorry, somebody's giving me heck for not being muted. I just unmuted 1 second ago. Great job. I had a question. I don't see any in the chat, so I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a bunch of questions myself. I know this because when we were looking at for example, companies like DeFasco or steel mills, the combined heat and power requirements are quite high. So if you wanted to displace, the energy consumption of a large manufacturing center, a 10 or 20 megawatt SMR isn't going to cut it because their kind of continuous demand is up around 200 to 500 megawatts. So I'm just wondering if you guys looked at all at what a typical mine kind of needs for power in terms of megawatts, and does it fit with a micro SMR, or is it going to be a rather large SMR?
Well, we looked at a few.
You guys can tell me anything because I have no idea, but it'd be nice to know what their needs.
We looked at a few examples of that. The Eagles Peak mine in particular that I mentioned in the slide there, we found a paper that went a bit more in depth to it, and it shows that there would be energy demands between around 17.5 megawatts to around 22 megawatts, which is part of why we wanted some sort of use for the excess heat there. Other mines can range, up or down. I believe gold mines are a bit on the lower end. I'm not sure about that. As well as copper mines can actually grow much higher to energy demands you're talking about, around 180 megawatts. So it really depends on the scale of the mine, the type of the mine, and what you're using this energy for. Since, with electrical or thermal use, there's only so much you can do. We did briefly look into potential cogeneration uses, though, for metal refinery, but couldn't really find too much in detail. Or really get to the heats that would be needed for most of the metal refinery.
Yeah, okay, good. There's a question too in the chat. Because it's been essentially around the point of, because these are mining communities and used to large scale engineering and kind of the processes and equipment that go with that, is there potential synergies in public acceptance because the mine is already operating there and is already fairly, to be honest, intrusive on the environment. And if you can reduce that, the environmental burden, maybe there's some synergy with that community where where they already have some acceptance of large-scale engineering.
But in this case in particular, there definitely could be some synergies too, since they have been consulting with local communities on how to be able to proceed with the mining while not damaging the land too much. So in the Ring of Fire in particular, they looked at underground mining so as to not, have large disturbances on the area. And I imagine with consultation, you could bring in details about nuclear and talk about limitations there.
Okay, guys, that's really good. The topic of mines and the number of mines in Canada proposed and existing is really important because the alternative is diesel. So that's a great presentation. There was another small question in there, but I think we got to move on to the next presentation because we've managed to lag a little bit there starting up. Okay, guys, great job. Normally in an audience, you might get some applause, but I'm the only one who's live, so I'll do the applauses for you. Thanks, guys.